Jared Curtis visited Oregon over the weekend, and even if he does end up picking Georgia, I've still got 5-star quarterback confidence in the Ducks in the 26 cycle. When you talk about decommitments from Oregon, like Bott Mulitalo recently, remember to always ask why. Justin Hopkins of Scoop Duck is going to join me to break down everything spring football that kicks off today in Eugene. This is That Show Out West. Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LaRue. We're starting off in our stagecoaches, in our covered wagons. It's time to take a trip down the Oregon recruiting trail to kick things off. And do you smell that? Do you feel that? I got a feeling that very soon we're going to be talking a lot about some Oregon Ducks recruiting victories, and I've got a feeling I'm going to be throwing out some holy wallawas. We're going to kind of start in reverse order. We're going to start furthest down the calendar and kind of work our way up to the present. That's just the way this show is stacked here today. Brandon Arrington, a 5-star corner. Some people think he could also play wide receiver, but most people certainly like his speed and his length in terms of playing the defensive side of the football. Brandon Arrington is locked in to 5 visits. Oregon, last on that list. So is he saving the best for last? We certainly hope so here at this program. Visiting Penn State on May 2nd, Texas A&M on June 8th. June 13th is the Alabama Crimson Tide. They're going to smack USC in the middle of a week there on June 17th, and then June 20th, as I mentioned before, coming to Oregon. I am always a big fan of having the last visit, because I feel like when a kid is on his final visit and you are that visit, this is going to be a big-time battle. This is going to be a war. And I think specifically with some of these Southeast schools like Texas A&M and Alabama, I know he's a guy that is out on the West Coast, and of course what USC is doing, certainly stepping up their game in terms of local West Coast recruiting. But from all that I've heard and all the smoke that's out there, I think that this is going to be a big-time battle. The Ducks have a 4-star prediction in from Steve Wiltfong. I think this happened sometime last week. Davon Benjamin, he's also from the state of California. So if Chris Hampton, the defensive backs coach, can go in, and we know what a great job he did last year with recruiting, but if he can land these one 4-star and a 5-star defensive back out of the state of California, maybe that puts a little bit of a dent into the momentum of the West Coast recruiting for the USC Trojans right now. Tomorrow, we've got a big-time visitor coming into Eugene, also on the defensive side of the football. This is a cross-country visit in 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson. Now, remember, Oregon has a 4-star linebacker already committed to this class in Tristan Phillips. They picked up 2 4-star linebackers in the 25 cycle that are going to be coming in as true freshmen this year, in Nasir Wyatt and Gavin Nix as well. Now, we talked about SEC schools being involved with a West Coast recruitment with Brandon Arrington. This is a little bit different because Tyler Atkinson he's in the Southeast. He's in the heart of the SEC there in Lawrenceville, Georgia. This is going to be another big-time battle. Georgia, Auburn, Alabama right now leading on the offer sheet right now. Very impressive offer sheet. You're going to have a very impressive offer sheet when you are the top uncommitted linebacker in the country right now and you are a top 20 overall player. So here's to hoping Oregon pulls out a lot of stops for him this weekend to really kind of impress him, because he would be, they've done solid at the linebacker position. You look at 26 and then of course you look at 2025 as well. But when you kind of look at the linebackers, there's been a lot of good, like 4-star level players. They don't really have a 5-star type of true linebacker commit quite yet like they do at some of these other positions where they've been able to go out and get 5-star elite top end level talent. So maybe this is the beginning of that right now for Tyler Atkinson. Speaking of visits, there was a pretty darn big visitor on campus this last weekend, and it was more than just campus. Maybe the top target for Dan Lanning and this staff right now, of course, is Jared Curtis, the 5-star quarterback out of the Nashville, Tennessee area. We've talked about him multiple times on this show here before. But sometimes, Dan Lanning, we know, is the ultimate closer. Sometimes you need to take it the extra mile. And as you can see here, they brought in the natural beauty closer, that is the Oregon Coast. So Jared Curtis and his family not only stopped in Eugene to talk to the staff there and have that visit there, but they also used it as an opportunity to have a family vacation. I want to focus on family right now because I think that's going to be a big key throughout this recruitment right now, battling against the University of Georgia. Where he goes to school in Nashville, Tennessee High School right now, very close, driving distance to Athens, Georgia. And when you compare it, obviously, going across country over to Eugene, Oregon, the location, that's like the main selling point. And I think that's the main thing right now that Georgia is going to be using in their recruitment. Yeah, Georgia obviously is successful, one of the best programs in the SEC. That's obviously going to be thrown in there as well. But I've talked about this on this show before. I think when it comes down to a quarterback-friendly system, development, being able to get them to the next level in the NFL, I think Oregon has an advantage with what they have with Will Stein as compared to what maybe Georgia has shown with the Stetson Bennett's of the world, with the Carson Becks certainly of the world as well, and really their offensive structure compared to the offensive structure that sits at Oregon. But kind of circling back to the family right now, Oregon kind of has to put in those extra resources. When you're sending your kid, instead of just sending them down the road between the hedges to Athens, Georgia, if this family is going to send their kid out to the West Coast, Oregon has to make sure that they've got, here it comes again, those ducks in a row when it comes to using the collectives and the NIL funds to maybe fund many trips for the family out to the West Coast if he indeed does commit to the University of Oregon. And they need to really hit home and really put into perspective how much better of an option it is, despite the distance, for the future of their son to be able to come to Oregon. I think that's going to be a big selling point to get over the proximity to home for Jared Curtis and the whole family dynamic. Convincing Jared Curtis to go out to the West Coast is certainly going to be a team effort. And when I say team effort, I don't necessarily mean all the coaches and the collectives themselves, but I think we're also talking about currently committed players. And boy, did this perk my ears up last night when I was scrolling through the Twitter sphere. And it all started with current 2026 commitment Tredarian Ball, who, by the way, is just, I can see him. He's very active on social media. He is just completely bought in right now to Oregon. There is no question in the recruitment of Tredarian Ball, certainly right now. Hashtag Jared to Eugene. Started with Tredarian Ball, then it went to a defensive back commit in Xavier Larice, who committed very recently, tagging Jared Curtis in said tweet. And then you've got Vilalami Maloa, who's a defensive line commit in this class. You know, I talked about this when I talked about Junior Day, was a month or so ago. When you have committed players on campus next to uncommitted players on campus, they can kind of elbow them and say, hey, I see the vision. I see what's going on here. I'm committed for a reason. Hey, come here and let's build something together. And now you've got this being thrown out on social media. It builds a lot of confidence. It builds a lot of anticipation, I think, for us fans of the Oregon Ducks right now, that maybe there's something in the air. Maybe there's something coming down the line. But it also shows the buy-in of some of these other commitments within this class of 2026. And that is what you love to see. Elite players recruiting other elite players to come to Oregon. And you got to think, if Jared Curtis is the next one, he's going to recruit the next batch of elite players certainly as well. But I know I talked a lot about Jared Curtis possibly coming to Oregon. But if Georgia is able to pull this thing off, folks, I still have some 5-star quarterback confidence because of Ryder Lyons. Now, Ryder Lyons is going to take a Mormon mission. He's more of a 2027 kid. So Curtis and Lyons, although they are 5-star quarterbacks classified right now in the class of 2026, they are really in two different classes right now. Now, with Ryder, we talked about the location with Jared Curtis and how you got to put in the extra effort to get Jared to Eugene when he's very close, of course, to Georgia. That's not the case with Ryder Lyons. Yes, I know he's being heavily recruited with USC, but Oregon, of course, has had a lot of success out on the West Coast, and it's obviously not the cross-country trip to the Southeast like somewhere like Nashville, Tennessee. But speaking of USC and speaking of Ryder Lyons, I think maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, you would have asked me and said, hey, Ted, what's your kind of confidence that Oregon can land someone like Ryder Lyons? I'd be like, well, it looks like USC seems to be the leader. But Ryder Lyons, within the past week, has given a couple of interviews to some affiliates at the Rivals networks, and maybe Oregon is putting a lot more balls into this court to be able to bring Ryder Lyons to Eugene.
For a long time now, people have perceived USC to be the leader, the favorite. Has that been fair, or how would you characterize where
I would say that, that has been fair. Maybe not as much anymore.
Who do you talk to the most other schools? Like, what's the one that just you're hearing from all the time, top of the list?
I mean, Oregon.
Yeah,
pretty much all the time. Coach Lanning, Coach Stein, those are pretty great relationship with those two, with my whole family, which is just pretty incredible. I want to play early, obviously. I'm a competitive person. But yeah, Oregon's for sure still in it too. Coach Stein, I've been saying it, we have the best relationship like I've had with any coach. He's my third scholarship, and they've pretty much held that the whole time. Like, always, I'm their number one guy. They've been super high on me. Like, Coach Lanning texts me all the time. Coach Stein texts me all the time. They watch my basketball games. Just stuff like that just means a lot, you know?
I know Dante Moore hasn't played it down yet as the Oregon quarterback, but we're already kind of looking to the future. We're already kind of planning this. I want to kind of talk about some timelines right now. The timeline of Jared Curtis is chef's kiss. It's picture perfect, because I think myself and a lot of people out there in Duck Nation really feel that Dante Moore is a guy for the 2025 season and the 2026 season. And then if Jared Curtis is a 26 guy, he's able to learn his freshman year, and then he can take over his second year on campus. It's really a great progression to possibly get Jared the starting quarterback job in the 2027 season. Because of the Mormon mission, it gets a little bit more sticky, gets a little bit more complicated, I think, with Ryder Lyons. If you do get that 2 years out of Dante Moore, is Ryder Lyons going to be in a situation to start right away when he wasn't on campus, when he wasn't in the room, when he wasn't learning. Instead, he was over there on his mission doing that stuff as well. There might be a situation where you might have a 1-year transfer stopgap, like someone like a Dylan Gabriel this last season, to pave the way if Ryder Lyons is indeed not ready at that point in time. But certainly a little bit two different timelines for both of these quarterbacks right now. Although we're very excited about possible future commitments that could come in this recruiting season, you've also got to talk about decommitments in the modern era of college football. And Oregon received one from a defensive line, 4-star defensive line prospect that they were really, really excited about in this 2026 class. But when you see a decommitment on social media, you have these thoughts and you have these feelings that kind of run through your head right away. But before you kind of tweet something or put something out on social media or really formulate a thought, make sure you ask yourself why. Why would somebody decommit from a school that is trending higher than maybe anybody right now, a school that has maybe as much financial resources as anybody right now, a top program in a Power 2 conference? And I think this decommitment from Bott Mulitalo fits into this category where we really need to ask ourselves why. We need to do our homework, we need to do our research, and then we can maybe start to formulate why Bott Mulitalo is no longer committed to the Oregon Ducks right now. Because we needed to ask why with Jonas Williams. You and I both know why. I just talked about it. Because they are pushing their resources to guys like Jared Curtis, to guys like Ryder Lyons as well. Now, when it comes to the why for Bott Mulitalo, it's certainly a little bit different. Bott Mulitalo, defensive line prospect, really good defensive line prospect, is decommitting because he wants to now play offensive line at the next level. When I first heard this, it was a little bit puzzling. And I reached out to some folks in the Oregon circles that I trust, and I asked them the same thing, and they came back with that same adjective. This was puzzling. And Mulitalo's switch from defensive line to offensive line, folks, it just doesn't fit into the Ducks' future. I think as a defensive line prospect, alongside like guys like Tony Cumberland, Tomahini Tupoi in there, Viliame Maloa, like this was a really good defensive line haul for Tony Tuioti. And even with those 3 guys that I mentioned, this is still a really good defensive line haul from this defensive coaching staff right here and right now. But when you really look at Mulitalo as an offensive lineman, he certainly does not rate as highly at that position. And when you look at where Oregon is recruiting on the offensive line, they've already got a commitment from Mater Dei's Cody Green. And then they are very hot and heavy for Emmanuel Iheanacho, Jackson Cantwell, 2 guys that are top 5 players in the country. Right now, Mulitalo's offensive line perspective does not fit in to where Oregon is recruiting right now on the offensive line. And thus, the NIL commitments that he possibly had as a defensive lineman certainly don't match up to what he's going to have as an offensive lineman. Going with the modern trend of college football, I've heard some whispers in the wind that there were some whispers in the wind to Bott Mulitalo himself that says, hey, maybe if you play offensive line, maybe things could be better for you. There could be maybe more benefits for you as an offensive lineman as opposed to a defensive lineman. I watch his tape. That doesn't really make sense to me, But that's kind of the day and age of college football where there are many whispers in the wind going to a lot of kids out there. Remember to always ask yourself why. Why with Jonas Williams? Why with Bott Mulitalo? We are dreaming of late August when the Oregon Ducks kick things off against Montana State to open up the season. But to get there, you got to start the 2025 season together as a team somewhere. And really the start of the 2025 journey and the climb up that ladder begins with spring practice. And it all goes down and kicks off today. We are going to be previewing everything, an in-depth preview here today, position by position on TSOW. And, there's one guy I think that I got to bring in to really break this thing down. He's the owner and publisher of Scoop Duck, the On3 Oregon affiliate site, and the unofficial mayor of Medford, Oregon. We welcome in Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck at On3. And J-Hop, as we kind of get spring practice started here today, what are some battles? What are some storylines? What are maybe 2 or 3 of those that really stand out to you as we get going here today on the 25 season?
Yeah, just like it's weird because there's a ton of questions about this team, but there's a ton of excitement along with it. And I think what I mean by that is Oregon's going to bring in a lot of new faces.
Yep.
But ultimately, they're not new. They've been on the roster. They just haven't been the featured guys yet. So we're going to kind of get a chance to see Dan Lanning bring in more of his guys, quote unquote, that he's recruited not necessarily through the transfer portal, few additions there, but guys that have been on the roster for a couple of years, been developing. So, that's kind of the main thing. The hard part is, Dan Lanning's a very conservative guy. I know he doesn't come off that way with the media in interviews. He's a very personable guy, but he's very conservative when it comes to his team. So right off the bat, we've got 2 practices with Oregon, and neither one of them are open to the public or to the media, excuse me. So kind of doing things behind closed doors a little bit. We'll get to hear the coaches talk about practice. And, of course, me and my team will be working behind the scenes to get any juice, but it's an exciting time. Everybody's got Oregon atop, a potential playoff championship level team. Sure. I think they've got the 3rd or 4th best odds to win a national championship entering this spring. So clearly there's enough of people with a lot of money that make a living on gambling that know that there's enough talent in Eugene, Oregon to compete for that. So going to be really fun to see the Dante Moore era. I know everybody knows that. Got Decorian Moore, that he might be, an emerging wide receiver. Is he the next Jeremiah Smith? That's probably pretty lofty because there's kind of only one of those. He's a generational guy, but you get my drift. And then, it's an all-new defensive backfield for Oregon, whether it's a transfer or somebody that's been in the program. It's an all-new backfield. So just a lot of questions, but really not a lot of concern, and that's a pretty good thing.
Let's start first. Most important position on the football field. You kind of mentioned it a little bit there with Dante Moore, of course, the quarterback position. So you mentioned first 2 practices close to the media. So we're, like you said, hey, they're going to try to find some scoops over there at Scoop Duck. You best believe that, certainly. But as we kind of look at Dante, what can we see? Is there anything we can really take out of spring practice to really see him maybe live up to some of those expectations, or maybe that we can start to predict that he could maybe get to that level that folks like Tez Johnson talked about at the Rose Bowl, media availability and things like that, because the coaching staff is going to say, hey, battle between Austin Novosad and Dante Moore, but is there anything we can really think that Dante can do during this springtime to really separate himself and really start to stake his claim as the leader of this team?
Yeah, I think it's going to be 2 things, one on the field and one not. The first being on the field, just be consistent, right? I think we all know that the arm talent's there. The guy can flick the ball a really long ways. But I think one of the things that you've seen in this offense, and whether it be Bo Nix or whether it be Dylan Gabriel, is they didn't turn the ball over. And I'm not saying that that's a knock on Dante Moore. I think they're just going to say, hey, Dante, you don't have to go big on every play. Be consistent, live in the moment, take 5 yards if it's there, take 7 yards if it's there, hit the check down. We put all these guys around you that are really good, use them. And so I think they're just going to look for that kind of consistency to be there. But then, of course, on the flip side, it's going to be nice to say, hey, man, let's go ahead and attack the ball vertically and hit him with a deep ball here. And you've got that. The second thing that I think is going to be really big, and I know that we'll get some interviews, is just seeing him kind of grow as a leader. Yep. He's kind of a quiet guy, and that's okay. Marcus Mariota was a quiet guy. Justin Herbert was a pretty quiet guy. Yep. You can be a quiet leader, but you still got to be a leader. You've got to command this team, specifically the offense, but especially the team, and know that when, these guys got to know when they get in the locker room or when push comes to shove and it's crunch time, that you're not going to, trip up, that you've got confidence in the ability to keep everybody calm and keep yourself calm. So I think those are the two areas that you're probably going to hear maybe Dan Lanning, Will Stein, and players talk about maybe where he grows or where they need him to grow and what they need from him. And if he can do that, I think you're looking at a really special offense this year.
Oh, you saw that picture on social media where he's kind of got his arms spread out and everybody's looking at him. I think one thing that I really want to see coming out is you mentioned the leadership. Everybody kind of looking to him, certainly. I want to talk about Austin Novosad a little bit. Since January, I've really been talking on this show as if Dante Moore is going to be the starting quarterback, and certainly a lot of people really feel that way, rightfully so, with his talent that we mentioned. But some people are kind of chiming in and say, well, Austin Novosad, pretty good as well. 4-star quarterback when he came out, and he showed in last year's spring game that he can certainly spin the football as well. Where do you see him in this spring practice period? Because for a lot of these guys now, the eligibility clock is ticking to really get their opportunity. And there may be an opportunity for maybe somebody else to come in and say, hey, Austin, we might have a starting quarterback role certainly for you. Where do you kind of see his mindset as we approach spring practice?
Yeah, very much kind of like a Tyler Shuck on this team, which Oregon fans will know. Obviously went on to have a really productive college career. And I think this is another guy that's really just right there at the bubble of, do I take my chances and move on somewhere else, or do I stay here and really try to win out this battle? Because it's pretty clear, if you win the quarterback one battle at Oregon, you're going to be set up for success. You might be a Heisman finalist. It's a great place for you to be. And I think Oregon feels very, very fortunate that they were able to keep Austin Novosad out of the transfer portal, and not just so he could be a really good QB2. You want to get both these guys out there and say, hey, may the best guy win. Okay, whichever one of you it is, we're going to back you, but you guys go and battle it out. And healthy competition's a great thing for any football team. That was a DNA of the Bama teams that Nick Saban led. That was a DNA of the Kirby Smart teams that won national championships. So I agree with you. I'm like you. I automatically talk about Dante Moore, and it's really hard not to, just given some of the things we've heard about it. Austin Novosad is a really good football player, and is not going to go away easily.
He is. He's a really good player. It's just Dante Moore was like the best quarterback in his class, and certainly we know that he can spin the football down the field as well. Luke Moga, Achilles Smith Jr. going to be in this quarterback room as well. Let's move into the backfield at the running back position. Okay, so you lose Jordan James, you bring in Mekhi Hughes. That's a pretty good trade, right? If you look at that from Oregon's perspective. They have one of the best, I think, 1B backs out there in Noah Whittington. You know what you're going to get. Right? If you ask Noah Whittington to do something, he's going to do it, and he's going to do so many. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to pass block. He's going to run the football really well. He's going to do a lot of things really well. Where things get really intriguing to me with the Ducks is this number 3 running back battle kind of thing. A lot of smoke out there for Dejon Riggs, okay? And I'm big and I'm very high on Riggs. We saw that at the end of the season in the Washington game, really just how good that he can be. Some other games certainly as well, but that Washington game certainly stuck out to me towards the end of the season. You got Jade Lamar, a D2 transfer that came in last year, in Jay Harris as well. Who do you think has the leg up for this RB3 spot as we get spring practice underway?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you got to look at Dink Riggs right away. And that's kind of the guy. I mean, there was a lot of excitement about him after last year. Of course, it was a little bit limited, but I think that was by design for Oregon, keep him preserved. Yeah. And I think there's a version of Oregon that said, hey, if we didn't get Mekhi Hughes, who's an obvious must-take if you can get him, no doubt about that. If you didn't get him, I think you probably felt pretty good with Noah Whittington and Dink Riggs heading into the season being your two-headed monster. And that's a good problem for Oregon to have. I think those 3 guys are really going to, excel and get plenty of carries. And I think we're going to see Oregon use all 3 quite a bit this year. They all bring something different to the table. Mekhi Hughes clearly is a really good running back. That guy's going to up his NFL stock probably like no other this year. But Whittington, like you said, his physicality this year improved so much. And he was already a good pass-catching wiggle kind of guy. And now you added, he had a couple big runs running over some guys in games and stuff. So yeah, I think it's Dink Riggs. Lamar is a guy that, came in and also had some good run last year at various times. So we'll just kind of see how it plays out. But if I'm giving it an answer, I think Dink Riggs heads into this competition probably with a leg up on that running back 3 spot.
I'm so excited at what he can do. I watched some interviews, some guys at the combine, and they're really giving him a lot of praise. So that 3-headed monster could certainly be a monster in the backfield for the Ducks next season. The guys that are going to be blocking and pass protection for those aforementioned quarterbacks, the offensive line, gone are 2 pretty good offensive tackles. Josh Connerly might be a first-round draft pick. Johnny Cornelius on the other side as well. You could have as much as 3 transfers, new plug-and-play guys coming in to this offensive line. But do you think, are there any dark horses that could maybe challenge some of these guys? The Jonas Williams, Doug Utu, and Zaire Addison are 2 really good true freshmen this year. Kawika Rogers. Do you think that they are dark horses? Can they challenge the Emmanuel Praynants? Can they challenge the Alex Harkeys, the Isaiah Worlds? There's been a lot of really good things said about Isaiah World and Emmanuel Praynant.
Yeah, I think those 3 transfers that you mentioned, Praydon and Harkey and World coming in, more than likely you're going to see those guys probably with the first unit when Oregon rolls out on the football field in the fall. But that's not to say that the other guys don't get a lot of run. And I think that, one thing we saw last year, Oregon really struggled with depth on the offensive line. A couple injuries came up. They moved guys around. It was the clear Achilles heel of this offense to begin the season last year, moving pieces around because of injuries. So now we mentioned the guys that you did, and then of course there's Matthew Bedford too, who was injured last year, potentially could be back for this year. So there's better depth there. I think Zaire Addison and Doug Utu come in and aren't starters. I don't think they're starters, but I think they're contributors and guys that are probably really closer to being ready. And again, now you're looking at a healthy rotation of maybe 8-9 guys in this offensive line, which gets a lot closer to an ideal number, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. So we'll see. It's going to be really tough, in my opinion. I think Isaiah World's a guy that probably ups his NFL draft stock as much as anybody. It's kind of weird to say this about a 3-year starter, but he's kind of raw still, just in terms of some technique. But everybody looks at him and says, man, he's got long arms. He moves really well. He's a big body. Like, that's an NFL guy right there. So if he figures it out, he's a guy that's going to possibly work his way into first round, second round, whatever the case might be. So again, I know I mentioned a lot of the same names as you. I don't know that there's another dark horse to be had outside of that group. But I think now with those 3 additions and with the guys you brought in recruiting, you feel a lot better about your depth entering this position.
Boy, Alik Terry's killing it on the recruiting trail, certainly on the offensive line, and it really starts here with this 25 class with Utu and Addison that we talked about as well. Great to see that depth. Let's go to the wide receiver position right now with a returning Evan Stewart, really slated to be that wide receiver 1 type of guy. You go to the next group of wide receivers, and I think this is where things get extremely interesting. Of course, we talked about Decorian Moore. Everybody's talked about Decorian Moore. Can he be a Ryan Williams? Can he be a Jeremiah Smith, the next in line of those great, really young wide receivers as well? But you get beyond that, and there's a lot of bodies. There's a lot of talented bodies, though, as well. I like Jeremiah McClellan. You got like veterans Justice Lowe, Gary Bryant. Jerrion Dickey's been banged up, but he was a 5-star guy when he came out. Kyler Casper, the length that he certainly provides in there as well. Do you think there is an anticipation of what the pecking order could be? Or do you think going into spring practice, this is just going to be, hey, let's throw 5 guys out there, rotate them evenly through the reps, and let's see who comes out on top?
Yeah, you're right. It's going to be, I think this is going to be the group that we hear talked about the most. And I think that's a good thing. You'd love to have a Jeremiah Smith out there. For starters, I think Evan Stewart's going to have a better year because he's going to be moved into a more natural role. Yeah. You had Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart out there who are very similar in how they play. Well, Tez Johnson gone now. You're going to move Evan Stewart into that role a little bit more because Tez Johnson's gone. I think you're going to see a lot more production out of him. Decorian Moore, like, you got to expect he's going to be one of the dudes, right? I mean, you win all after him if you're Oregon. Huge get, your biggest signing. That guy's going to be on the football field. Whether he's a starter or not remains to be seen. He's going to be on the football field. But, Kyler Casper comes back off of injury. Just kind of a different unicorn there, really tall guy, not quite a tight end, but just a little bit. I think you're going to see what I'm going to say is a lot of situational football out there when it comes to the receiver room, because they have so many people, so many players that do different things. We haven't even talked about Malik Benson, the transfer from Florida State.
Thank you.
Who, transferred in and is kind of, under the shuffle there just because he hasn't maybe had as much production. But you look at Florida State's offense last year and it was abysmal. And, is he a byproduct of that? So that's a guy that can stretch the field vertically and take the top off of defense. And we just talked about a quarterback with a cannon for an arm. Mm-hmm. He might be in for a big year. So this will very much, I guess, here's the thing I will say about receiver, and I feel strongly about this. We will not have a clear answer on who the 3 starters are coming out of spring.
Yeah. This
will very much go into fall. And, I know Dan Lanning's going to challenge all these guys, say, hey, we're going to let the cream rise to the top. And if you're the guy, you're the guy. And so I very much believe that those guys will go into summer and fall ball feeling that there's still an open competition. And I think there will be.
Popular buzz out of spring ball might be focused on Decorian more, but I've got my eyes on Kenyon Sadiq to really see what the word is coming out of spring ball with him. Let's move over to the defensive side of the football. Outsiders looking at the Oregon football program might look at this and say, lose Jordan Birch. Derek Harmon, going to be a high-level draft pick. Jamari Caldwell, you lose those guys, well, Oregon's defensive line is going to regress, right? Maybe not so much. So Mateo Uiagalelei is going to be coming back. He was one of the top sack guys in the Big Ten last year. Amari Washington, there's a lot expected out of him, certainly at the defensive tackle. He was in that rotation last year as well. But looking beyond that, there's a lot of youth. You could throw in Tatum Tuioti certainly coming off the other side and that edge as well. Which defensive line contenders among Bear Alexander, Terrence Green, Tioni Gray, Aiden Breland, Blake Purchase, Elijah Rushing kind of coming off the edge as well. Which group of those guys do you have your eye on to really make some noise this spring?
All of them.
I like that.
A lazy answer. Yeah. No. I think Amari Washington, for starters, is going to be a monster this year. Yeah. I know he was out there. People saw him, but kind of overshadowed by Caldwell and Derek Harmon, respectively so. I think he's going to be a monster this year. And I will say this, Oregon basically only went into the transfer portal at defensive line and got one guy, Bear Alexander, as we know, right? Bear Alexander's like a perfect situation for Dan Lanning. The guy has every NFL trait that you'd ever want. If he puts in the work, that's an absolute animal monster in the middle of your defense, okay? Hasn't produced quite yet, but he's still got time. So that to me tells me this, that Dan Lanning, who's a defensive-minded guy, as we know, is very confident in this group. I think Tioni Gray is a guy that we need to talk quite a bit about. I think he's ready to step up. Zadavian Sims is another guy that's a monster out there. Terrence Green has absolutely every measurable you could want in a defensive lineman. He's long, he's strong, he carries himself really well. I think it's going to be Blake Purchase season this year coming off the edge. I love Tatum Tuioti. He's one of those guys that's a lunch pail every down, going as hard as he can. Love watching him play. I think Oregon felt very fortunate to keep Blake Purchase this year. Colorado and others tried like hell to get him out of Eugene. I think he's coming in for a big season. So Elijah Rushing, again, that's a 5-star that's coming to Oregon and has had a year to develop. I think he might be behind some of those guys still, but when you're behind, it just means it's healthy competition. It's time for me to put in the work to catch these other guys. So, again, healthy competition is a great thing. And I will trust Dan Lanning in the fact that he decided not to really dip into the transfer portal to go fill these holes. He clearly sees that he's got what it takes on the roster. And I'm really excited to see this group come together.
There are some folks out there saying that this might be one of the deepest rooms. One of the best rooms is this defensive line room right now. Quick, finishing up the defensive line, that only transfer that you talked about, Bear Alexander. We all know kind of the talking points that is surrounding Bear in his stops at Georgia and USC. Hey, if there's one guy that can see the talent in Bear Alexander, it's Dan Lanning, who was the defensive coordinator in Bear Alexander's first year over there at Georgia. But how important is this spring for Bear Alexander to get off to a good start and really show this coaching staff, like you said, that he is indeed putting in the work? Because, man, if he's putting in the work and we see good Bear Alexander, that D-line of Mateo and Tuioti and Washington and Bear, man, they could really wreak some havoc.
Yeah, no, it was a win-win situation for Oregon to bring him in. I think they've got a really good room already. but a guy like Bear Alexander has the ability to elevate your room exponentially. And it's all there. I think he knows it's all there. And, I think he just needed to find the right spot for him to buy in and really, kind of decide, hey, I need to develop. And that's the thing. Now you're there and you've got these guys that are quote unquote younger than you saying, hey man, I've been here. You're not taking my spot.
Sure.
You better come and earn it. And, so far the returns on Barry Alexander have been very positive. I know there's been some social media posts from him and you look at him, you're like, damn, that's a monster. I mean, that dude is a monster. So I'm with you. I think in terms of depth, 1, 2, 3 across the board, Oregon's got a lot of depth. I realize that it's somewhat unproven, but again, you're talking about Dan Lanning has clearly seen enough in practices day in and day out to say, I don't need a bunch of guys. I'll just take this Barry Alexander guy. And if he works himself into a first-round NFLer, we're good.
The ultimate low risk, high reward is that guy of Bear. Let's go to the linebacker room right now. I think we know what we got from the starting position. Bryce Betcher coming back, Devin Jackson, one of the fastest pound-for-pound guys on this team coming back at linebacker over there. But then we talk about depth, a lot of depth in the D-line, but now the depth at the linebacker position. How do you assess the depth of guys like a Dylan Williams, Jerry Mixon, Braden Platt, and some of these other guys? And do you think that this spring is really a time for them to prove that they can be that capable option where when Bryce goes off the field, when Devin goes off the field, that there's not a big drop-off there?
Yeah, I think, we talked about receivers, and I very much see this room in a similar light, right? Bryce Betcher is going to be out there, right? That's an absolute guarantee. He's going to be a leader of that defense. He's a guy. They were very fortunate to get him back for another year. I think Devin Jackson's a guy that we saw just really raised his profile exponentially last year. I think he's ready to take that next step this year. Those two guys are going to be the anchors out there, but there's still a lot of snaps to be had for Braden Platt and the others behind them, Dylan Williams. And Braden Platt's a guy that I mentioned him, first of all. I think he's the guy. I think you really look at him, you look at his physicality, you look at the fact Dan Lanning likes his linebackers that can move sideline to sideline. He doesn't want the big thumpers. I like those guys that can come up and hit, but he needs his linebackers to be able to move in space.
Yes.
And so you look at a guy like Braden Platt, who's a track and field guy, it has plenty good size. Dylan Williams is really good. Kamar Matudi got some run as well last year a little bit. And Jerry Mixon, this is his third year now. He's been in the program a couple years already. Yeah. I know he's nipped at the heels. So that to me is healthy competition. All those guys are going to be, fighting for the snaps and who might be first on in an injury or who might be first off when one of those guys needs a blow. There's snaps to be had there. So that will be another room, just like receiver, where I don't think we'll have the answer in the spring. It'll be later in the fall before we get a little bit clearer picture there.
That's good to see. Battles may be turning into wars as we go into fall camp. And if there's any place where battles are going to turn into wars, I saved this one for last for good reason. It's the defensive backfield. 5 guys out, 5 guys in. I call it the line change of Oregon football, certainly right now. And like the defensive line, you look at it from an outsider perspective and be like, I don't know about that. But you let's kind of analyze what's coming in. Dylan Thieneman. Folks around the program saying he might be the best overall player on this football team. Certainly taking an upgrade at safety, the transfer out of Purdue. Theron Johnson, honorable mention All Big Ten, comes in from Northwestern. The rest of this, there's a lot of talented bodies, right? Like we talked about at the wide receiver position, certainly as well. Do you view any guys as favorites for some of these positions coming into spring football? I've heard some good returns from Ife Opadegwu, possibly Kingston Lopa and Peyton Woodyard, maybe over there at safety. We know Jaleel Florence has been around this program for a couple of years. Are there any guys in the laundry list of 4- and 5-star guys that are in this secondary that Chris Hampton has recruited to come in here that maybe lead the way as we kick off spring practice today?
Yeah, this is going to be a fun group to track as well. And like you said, you're gonna pencil Dylan Thieneman in one of those spots because that's happening. Like you said, the early talk about this guy has been they are very glad they spent the money on making sure this kid wanted to come to Oregon. And that's great because that's going to be a veteran presence to help bring some of these young guys along. I think you got to look at Jaleel Florence. I mean, I think there was maybe some talk at certain points about him maybe not coming back. What was kind of going on with him last year, injury, just all of that stuff. And like you said, that's a guy who's been around the program in a couple of years prior to his injury, was a really good football player, probably still a really good football player. Him and Efi, I think, are going to be two guys that really compete at the cornerback position all spring long. And again, it's probably not safe to assume Theron Johnson takes one of those cornerback spots, but it's probably not unreasonable all the same. So another guy there is Dakota Fields. That's a guy that I've heard a ton of stuff about Dakota Fields in this room. And that's what you want. If you're Dan Lanning, you're now in a position. Yes, he did have to use the transfer portal again in secondary, but you're now in a position between the classes you've signed and then this incoming class with Trey McNutt, Neem Offer, Dorian Brew, those guys that are going to be really good, and you're probably going to see them all on the field this year, to now basically maybe stop relying on the transfer portal to fill these spots. So that's going to be a really big key moving forward. And it's going to be interesting how this plays out with these guys, because this has implications for years, not just this season, for years, to see which of these young guys fill in and which spots are available maybe next year or the year after, whatever the case might be. So another fun group. And I know it just feels like I keep saying the same thing, but that's what makes this spring really fun for Oregon football. There are a lot of battles, a lot of positions, a lot of new faces. But at the end of the day, not all these faces are new. They've been around the program for a couple of years. They just haven't been the guy yet. And now's their opportunity. This is what Nick Saban did at Alabama so well. He would get these 4 and 5 stars and put them in behind other 4 and 5 stars. And then when those guys took off, it was the next group that came in, and they were already playing elevated football. And I think that's what we're seeing Dan Lanning looking to do here at Oregon.
And that's the mark of that type of program. You mentioned Alabama. When you stack top 5 class on top 5 class on top 5 class, you tend to get a lot of competition, and you tend to certainly get a lot of great players. Always great to talk to my guy J-Hop, Justin Hopkins over at Scooped Up. You know that they are going to have, him and Max, they're going to have the scoops there this spring. So make sure you go over there and follow them. Justin, always great to talk to you.
Thanks, buddy.
A big thanks to my guy Justin Hopkins over at Scoop Duck. Make sure you check out him. Max Torres has some elite recruiting coverage over there, the On3 affiliated Oregon Ducks site. Here's to hoping some holy Wallawas are in the future for some big recruiting news here after this weekend going into the weeks ahead. You know we are going to have it covered here on TSOW. But until next time, I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.